We're opening this inquiry at what you might call the scene of a profound logical paradox. Our subject is the human intellect. It's an instrument we trust without question to calculate the vast mechanics of the cosmos. And yet, we're often told to silence that very same instrument the moment it detects a signature, a hint of purpose within that cosmos. So this investigation is going to examine the validity of that command.
Right, so the central question really becomes one of jurisdiction, doesn't it? By what authority do we grant the intellect total sovereignty over the material world, only to revoke it the second we approach the threshold of the immaterial? That's the fundamental tension we absolutely have to resolve.
And this is the core of the problem. Modern thought often posits that we are simply the result of undirected random material processes, an accident. But if that's true, then this accidental product, the human mind, seems to function as an incredibly well-calibrated receiver, one that seems pre-tuned to perceive order, purpose, and meaning. So if the cosmos is broadcasting a signal, our intellect appears to be the very apparatus designed to process it.
Okay, so we now formally open the first phase of our inquiry. We're going to conduct an audit of the foundational premises of disbelief as they're presented in the source material.
So the first axiom of the atheist claim is that religion is just a primitive science gap filler, something made obsolete by empirical discovery. But the Quranic position isn't that it explains away natural phenomena. Instead, it calls for us to reflect on them as enduring proofs, or ayats. So the argument isn't a refutation of science at all, but actually an invitation to a much deeper reading of its findings.
Let's transition to the second phase now, an examination of the structural integrity of the moral system presented in the Quran. We're going to analyze its axiomatic logic piece by piece.
Okay, so the atheist claim generally posits that morality is just a product of evolutionary empathy and, shifting cultural norms. It's a relative construct. The Quranic response, however, is that morality is an objective system, one rooted in a divine command. The crucial distinction here is between an ethic of contingency and an ethic of axiomatic principle.
And this perfectly illustrates the functional output of that objective system. You see, the Quranic ethic demands a justice that literally transcends emotional contingency. It commands impartiality, not just toward your friends, but even toward those people for whom you feel hatred. It establishes an ethical standard that's completely insulated from the unpredictable fluctuations of human feeling.
The logical progression of this moral architecture is incredibly precise. Step 1 establishes the universal standard, an objective divine command for justice. Then, Step 2 stress tests this standard against our own raw human emotion, requiring steadfastness even toward enemies. And finally, Step 3 applies it to what is inviolable, elevating the sanctity of human life and honor. The system is completely internally coherent.
Now, a crucial distinction must be made here. The atheist claim often conflates the divine text with what came later, cultural or patriarchal distortions. The source material argues that the Quranic text itself doesn't marginalize women. On the contrary, it actually initiated a whole series of legal reforms that were, for their time, truly revolutionary.
And the legal axioms are specific. For their context, they were revolutionary. The Quran establishes a woman's independent right to earn, to inherit, and to own property. It defines marriage not as subordination, but as a bond of mutual love and tranquility. It assigns equal spiritual and civic duties, and it establishes an unprecedentedly high evidentiary bar to protect a woman's honor. If you take these together, these are not minor adjustments. This is a foundational legal restructuring of a woman's place in society.
And the claim that faith-based societies inherently stifle empirical progress, well, that's directly countered by the historical data. During the Islamic Golden Age, a civilization that was explicitly guided by the Quranic call to read and reflect on creation. It led the world in mathematics, in medicine, and in optics. From the establishment of algebra to laying the groundwork for modern optics, this period provides a really powerful case study where faith acted as a catalyst for intellectual inquiry, not a suppressor of it.
This shifts the burden of proof. You see, having examined the external logic of the system, we now have to turn inward to analyze the evidence presented by its observable impact on the human psyche, on the calibrated receiver itself.
The typical charge is that faith is just a geographical lottery, an accident of where you were born. But the Quranic response reframes this completely. It argues that faith isn't a cultural inheritance, but a conscious recognition of a truth that resonates with the universal human design. It's not an external imposition, it's an internal alignment.
And the key operational term for this human receiver is fitra.
Now, within this system, it's defined not as some vague mystical feeling, but as a functional intellectual design. You can think of it as the internal logic gate calibrated from origination to recognize coherence, purpose, and truth.
The textual evidence for this concept is axiomatic to the whole system. The Quran posits this fitra not as a feature of a specific culture or a certain race, but as the unalterable cognitive architecture of all people. Religion, then, in this context, is simply the act of aligning one's life with this original, functional design.
So let's analyze the system's affective or emotional resonance. The atheist claim is that religion operates through guilt and fear. However, the Quranic framework, as it's presented in the source, is founded upon the principle of divine mercy, or rahma, which is described as an all-encompassing attribute.
The quantitative data here is pretty significant. The concept of divine mercy is mentioned over 300 times in the text. This sheer frequency establishes mercy not as some secondary or conditional attribute, but as the foundational operating principle of the reality being described. It's the system's default state. And the system's direct address to the human psyche is one of profound hope. This verse isn't a threat of punishment, it's a direct, universal call to not despair. It offers total forgiveness, positioning the divine relationship as one that's predicated on redemptive mercy, not perpetual dread.
We now pivot to the final synthesis of our investigation. Let's consider the cumulative, quiet weight of the evidence that has been presented by this system.
Given the premises we've examined, an internally coherent moral architecture and a human intellect that seems pre-calibrated to recognize truth, the logical corollary emerges. Within this framework, faith is not an abandonment of reason. Instead, it's presented as the necessary destination, the terminus, to which reason, when it's fully and honestly applied, must inevitably lead.
The system's framework of proof is therefore multifaceted. It's not just one thing. It presents a literary and logical challenge against its own imitability. It points to empirical signs in the natural world. It draws lessons from the observable patterns of history, and it appeals to the internal resonance within the human psyche. These are converging lines of evidence, not isolated points.
Consequently, the system doesn't position itself in opposition to rational inquiry. Quite the contrary, it actually frames empirical discovery as a pathway toward deeper conviction. Reason and revelation are not presented as contradictory forces, but as complementary guides in the pursuit of truth. And so, we arrive at the profound realization that this line of inquiry offers. Within its own framework, faith is not a leap into the dark, it is positioned as the quiet, final, and inescapable conclusion of a rational mind that has followed the evidence all the way to its logical terminus.
We'll close our investigation with a final question for your consideration. If we accept the analogy that the cosmos is a signal and our intellect is a receiver that is calibrated to its frequency, then what is the logical and rational cost of choosing not to clear the static?